everybody. Welcome. I'm not going to use the mic because the mic is attached to Henry, and we're just not going to complicate things. So I'm going to hope you hear my booming voice. I'd like to welcome you all to this Focus on the Humanities Distinguished Lecture. My name is Susan Friedman, and I direct the Institute for Research on the Humanities here. And this lecture series of featuring Madison faculty is co-sponsored by the Center for Humanities, which Sarah Geyer directs, and by the Institute for Research in the Humanities, which I direct. At the Institute, we have about 45 fellows, for example, and Henry Bruhl, who is our lecturer tonight, is the Elvehjem Bascom Professor of Art History in the Department of Art History and Afro-American Studies. He was a senior fellow at the Institute from 2010 to 2014, and senior fellows have a 50% appointment at the Institute for the 4 years of their terms, where they have extra time to do their research and also provide tremendous intellectual leadership and help to provide a sense of continuity in the community of 45 fellows at the Institute. Henry received his PhD at Columbia in 1973, and before coming to UW-Madison in 1990, he taught at Cleveland State, SUNY Purchase, the University of California, Santa Barbara. His field is African art and its diasporas, east into the Americas, especially Brazil, but more than Brazil, and also to some extent west into the Indian Ocean. He began with a focus on Yoruba art from West Africa and still does a tremendous amount of work there, but I think his field is much broader than the art of one people. In working with African art, he insists that one must combine visual arts, verbal arts, dance, music, the object world, the spirit world, the fabric world, the material world. In other words, what Henry has done in all of his work is to insist that aesthetics and art are not a field apart, separate, in some kind of narrow sense, but aesthetics is understood as an integral aspect of life in its entirety. Art as then thoroughly integrated into the lives of the people who make it and participate in it, enjoy it, and use it. His methods are wide-ranging in cultural studies, religious studies, material culture, performance studies, and cultural practices in a very general sense. He also has a tremendous range in what he's done for his field. As a scholar, he's had grants from the Guggenheim Foundation, many grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, from the Rockefeller Foundation. He's held a couple of Fulbrights, the Newbery Fellowship, and many more. He's also done a tremendous amount of work as a curator, working with many different museums to set up exhibitions, get catalogs written, and so from our perspective at the Institute, we consider this a very important way, curation as a very important way that research participates in the public humanities. That is, it's not just directed at other scholars, but directed at a wide audience outside universities, wider publics. He's also been a filmmaker, particularly documentary, different kinds of documentary films, and he is certainly a teacher. He just finished teaching a seminar and just barely made it to his own lecture here today. And so it's no surprise he also has won a number of teaching awards. He's published many books, and I'm only going to mention a couple of them, but some of the titles give you a sense of just what his approach to African art is. He published a book called Yoruba, 9 Centuries of African Art and Thought. 9 centuries, that's quite a long range. Introspectives, Contemporary Art by Americans and Brazilians of African Descent. Beads, Body and Soul, Art and Light in the Yoruba Universe. His work on the figure, the mermaid figure of Mami Wata, initiating in West Africa but spreading throughout the diaspora and taking on different forms is the work he, I believe, got a Guggenheim for. He produced a book called Mamiwata, Arts for the Water Spirits in Africa and its Diasporas in 2008. And in addition to that book, this, I decided I'd just carry it. It's very heavy. But he edited this a fabulous source book on, called Sacred Waters, Arts for Mamiwata and Other Divinities in Africa and its Diaspora. And it gives a real sense of the range of his work. While he was at the Institute as a senior fellow, he was developing his theory of sensiotics, which I'm sure he's going to talk to you about today. But I remember him telling us that this is really a concept of art that he feels he learned directly from Yoruba artists and masters as the basis for a new, but he uses it not just to understand the art of one people, but to say maybe all of us who are interested in the arts ought to take a lesson from this kind of approach, which is an approach where art is not only integrated with life, as I mentioned before, and with culture, but art integrates and can integrate all five senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Many of the fine arts privilege sight, what we see when we go to a museum in a painting or a sculpture. But what about all the other senses, and how, if we engage all of them, does art become something different? Around this idea, he organized a symposium for the Institute called Embodied Knowledge, Sensory Studies in the 21st Century, in which he brought people who were specialists in taste, in sound, in sight, in smell, and so forth, to work in an interdisciplinary way to work out this idea of sensiotics. I wanted to tell you about that because a 50-minute documentary was made about that conference, and it is now on the IRH, the Institute's website. So if you go to irh.wisc.edu/projects, you'll find that 50-minute documentary. So let's listen to what Henry has to say. And I think that he's going to wake us. It's a rainy, miserable day, but Henry's going to wake us up.
Thank you, Susan. Ekabo. Hey, that's good. Got a couple of Yoruba speakers in the house. I just greeted you with the Yoruba greeting of welcome, Ekabo. And that greeting is the start of a conversation, as every greeting is and should be. So it's only gone halfway. I gave you my greeting, Ekabo. A few of you knew the response and responded, but many of you haven't. So as we start this conversation this afternoon, you're all going to become Yoruba speakers. So the response to Ekabo is O, but O with enthusiasm, okay? Ekabo. O. Not bad, not bad. Okay, I think they're awake, Susan. All right, so that's the start of our conversation this evening. Before I begin to talk about the topic tonight, I'm going to do something else that's important in the Yoruba context, and I think a universal, of universal importance. The Yoruba call it an ijuba, and it's a recognition of and a giving of thanks to those who bring us to where we are in our lives. So as part of that ijuba, I want to acknowledge the support, the guidance of my teachers, my mentors, my master carvers who taught me how to carve, all the elders in Yoruba country who shared with me their extensive knowledge about Yoruba life and Yoruba philosophy and Yoruba arts. And I give my ijuba to them. In addition, I want to add Susan Friedman to this dedication because she created and continues to create a wonderful atmosphere of openness, of dialogue, of constructive criticism, to push us further in our thinking and in our work. It's been a great honor and privilege to be part of the Institute for Research in the Humanities. And finally, I dedicate this talk to my life partner and wife, the brilliant and beautiful Sarah Khan, who is here in the audience and who is giving probably a better talk than this one tonight tomorrow at noon for the Center for South Asian Studies. So I hope maybe you'll have a chance to witness her talk as well. Okay, that's the topic. But before we come to that topic, thanks, Susan. I'm going to take you on a journey to actually more than 5 senses, because each culture kind of thinks about and categorizes the senses in different ways. There are some cultures that only recognize 1 or 2, some that recognize 26. We have generally thought about 5 senses, but for the Yoruba and for my talk tonight, there are going to be 7 that I'm going to be talking about. And one of them is the one we're going to start with tonight, which is an important sense for the Yoruba, and I hope it'll be important for you as well. And that is the sense of motion. Now, being in the academy, probably most of you have been sitting in seats as you are now, maybe looking at your computers, maybe listening to some professor go on and on about some topic, all right? So you need to get up and move. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up and join me and experience that first sense of motion that I want us to deal with. You're listening to Ricardo Lembo playing Mambo Yo-Yo. So what you have to do is mambo, find the rhythm and start to move. Come on, keep moving. I see one of my senior fellows who isn't moving. Okay, sit down. Susan asked me to make sure you were awake. I thought that was probably the best way to be sure of that. So, the sense of motion, and I'll be talking about it a little bit further on in the presentation. I'm going to give you another piece of music now. Ricardo Lembo is from Angola, but he's based in LA now. He's a man who speaks many languages, African and Spanish and English and French. And his work is a really powerful presence, both in this country and in Africa, wherever he performs. I'm going to take you to another musician now, a Nigerian musician by the name of Sir Victor Uwaifo. And in the 60s and the 70s, when I was hanging out in Nigeria, he came up with a very famous song, and in fact, it's in honor of Mami Wata. This was one of the first introductions that I had to Mami Wata, this mother of water spirit who has become almost Pan-African in her presence. And he did a song called Guitar Boy, talking about himself and how he met one of these mermaid Mamiwata spirits on the beach one night and how it inspired him to become a singer. So I want you to listen to his music. For the first part of it, keep your eyes open, but at a certain point I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and listen to the rest of the piece, okay? Whoop, sorry. Now close your eyes. Do you notice any difference in how you're perceiving the music when you have your eyes open? You can open your eyes now. As opposed to when your eyes were closed? What's the difference, if there is one? Yes?
In a sense, you have a visual mentally.
Aha. Okay, but imagined visual, right? Yeah. What else? Does the sound have more of any impact?
They have multiple, I can hear the multiple tracks.
Right. Yeah, you can hear it better. I think this is, and I like to do this because I think it's an excellent example of how we privilege certain senses over other senses, depending upon the situation. I know when I go to hear a symphony, watching the musicians and the conductor perform is one thing, but I understand and hear the music in a very different way if I close my eyes and then listen. So what I'm suggesting is that we are the products of our multisensorial experiences that are happening continuously and simultaneously. And in most cases, all of the senses are being involved. Even if the scent in a room is very subtle, it's also shaping how we see or feel about that environment that we're in. That's why I'm asking you to come to your senses. Now I want to read something that Victor Owaifo wrote about his music and that piece, because it also brings up another issue in the senses, and that is the notion of synesthesia, the mixing of various senses simultaneously. This is Victor Owaifo. When I was in art school, I discovered colors in sound, and sound in colors. Do was a strong sound, so it was black. Re was red. Mi was blue. Fa was green. So was white. La was yellow. And Ti was violet. The whole change came when I transposed these various sounds to the beautiful colors of Akwete cloth. And I'll show you an example of that shortly. This is hand-woven cloth by women in eastern Nigeria. He goes on to say, my sounds create moving rhythms of colors to give the Akwete sound. And that's what he became famous for, the Akwete sound. Sir Victor Owaifo was a synesthete. He is one who experiences multiple senses simultaneously. He saw colors as sounds, like some people see certain numbers as smells. So, another example of the importance of the senses for one particular artist. Now, for another sound that's closer to home. Let's see if you can recognize it. Anybody not recognize it? Now what I want you to think about is how you felt at that point in the movie, or at various points in that movie. I could have also taken the scream from Psycho, but I prefer sharks. So again, it's to bring you to the consciousness of the power of sensory experience, and not just sight, but sound and motion that you've already engaged in. And here is an example of those do-re-mi colors for Victor Waifo. This is an akwete cloth done by mostly Igbo women from eastern Nigeria. Beautiful, beautiful textiles. And I think you can see how a person who is a synesthete, where these multiple layers of senses reinforce one another, was a clear and strong inspiration for him. Okay, this evening, this is where I'm going to take you. I'm going to first introduce you to how I came to my senses and how I came to what I call sensiotics. Then I'm going to define for you the term, the approach that I'm developing. And then I'll give you examples of my sensiotics research, my multisensorial work among the Yoruba people, with a variety of examples on different senses. And then finally conclude with some larger implications, because I think this is an approach and an understanding that is actually universal to humankind, not just Yoruba people in West Africa. So I start with this image, which you've probably been seeing as you find the posters for this talk on campus. I began this journey about the senses when I was a teacher in Nigeria. I was teaching French and English through the Peace Corps. But as an undergrad, I had minored in studio art, mostly sculpture, which is what I was most interested in. And as I was teaching my students French and English, and they were teaching me Yoruba, I got to know my Yoruba community, and I became much more interested in that than in my teaching. And as my Yoruba improved, I made friends with a Yoruba sculptor by the name of Shanutsi. And I asked him if I could become his apprentice. And I was lucky that he said yes, he agreed. And I worked with him for about 7 or 8 months as an apprentice, trying to learn traditional Yoruba carving techniques. And it took those 7 or 8 months, let me tell you, because when I started, because the Yorubas use a carving tool that's like, it looks like a hoe, but a sharpened hoe. It's an adze. So you have to be able to chop and hit the same place on the wood repeatedly with force and with accuracy, and avoid your fingers and toes. And in the beginning, I could work for maybe about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I was exhausted because I was holding on to that thing as tight as I possibly could, trying to hit the same place every time. And the tighter I held the tool, the adze, the more erratic my stroke. A master Yoruba sculptor can work from dawn until dusk without stop. And that's what I had to learn, how to master the tools and embody the bodily knowledge and wisdom that my master had. So I did that one first apprenticeship, and then I did a mask-making apprenticeship a few years later during a research trip to Nigeria. And I met the head of the Gelede Society, because this is what you're looking at are some Gelede masks. Gelede is a masking tradition among the Yoruba that honors the mystical powers of women. And it was what attracted me because it's a festival that combines not just carved masks and elaborate cloth costumes, but intricate choreography, multi-patterned drum rhythms, and in a night ceremony, songs as well. It was a multisensorial, multimedia experience, as much art in Africa is. So I met the head of the Gelede Society, and I said, I'd love to come. And he said, sure. And then I was feeling bold on that day. I don't know why. Maybe I had had a little too much to drink. I don't. But in any case, I said, you know, I'm a carver. And he said, yeah. I said, yes. I did an apprenticeship a couple of years ago in Abeokuta, where I was living. He said, okay, let me see if you can carve. Make us a Gelede mask. So I had about 6 weeks to do it. And that red face mask that you see in the slide is my work. And it was accepted, it was received, it was given to an excellent dancer, which was another honor that I received as the maker of that mask. And I keep waiting for it to turn up at Sotheby's at going at a high price by an unknown African master carver. So that experience, that apprenticeship experience, was all about trying to learn and embody knowledge, wisdom, that is at its basis sensory. And it was also part of this Gelede festival that I was seeing how much the multi-sensory environments of these arts play in Yoruba society. Here you're looking at two master dancers marrying each other in this complex rhythm. And I'm going to show you a film clip because it's about the dance, and those dancers, those masqueraders, have leg rattles, iron leg rattles. They have to imitate the very complex multi-rhythms of the drum ensemble that's performing for them. And they are and they are honoring women and men within the society. So here's a close-up from it. And now take a look at this moving sequence of 2 or 3 different masqueraders at one of the best festivals that I attended back in the 70s. Watch this guy in the red costume. He goes off, but he'll come back and do a solo. High kicks, you can see the leg rattles. Here's a younger dancer with no leg rattles. Here comes that one in the red. It's actually a mask that is honoring Fulani women for their elaborate coiffures. Okay. I just wanted you to show you a Gelede mask made by an actual master, not an apprentice like myself. This is in the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and it's a wonderful display of a carver's virtuosity, because he's not only done one mask, he has created 2. He has a mask that is covered with another mask. And at the key point, at the climax of the presentation, he flips this open to reveal his inner face. To show you an example between my mediocre piece and a real master's work. Now, Gelede, FFA Gelede has 2 parts. It has the afternoon dance that you just witnessed, but it also has a night ceremony with this elaborate masquerader that you see. Is that better? Okay. This is Oro Efe. This is a masquerader whose power is not in his visible visual form, with this incredible appliqué costume and elaborately carved headdress. That's really secondary. For the Yoruba, what's important are the songs that Oro Efe performs. He has to start at dusk, and he has to have a repertoire of songs that will last until dawn the next morning. It's like a wake keeping. And those songs are all about social comment, praising positive social action and critiquing and satirizing negative actions within the community. He sings the song first, then it's carried by a chorus of women singers from the Gelede Society, and then everybody in the community sings it again and again, so that the message goes very deep. this is art that's shaping community. And it's words that are shaping community, the words of the songs that he sings. You see him because I happen to have a flash on my camera. But really, you would only dimly see Oro Efe. He would only be lit by the oil lamps on the market stalls in the marketplace, because Efe Gelede takes place in the main market towns, market squares of all Yoruba towns, because that's the place where women control. Powerful women, marketeers, but also powerful priestesses and other women in the society. So Gelede, Efe Gelede is the most appropriate place for this to be taking place. So it's dance, it's song, it's motion and movement. And I'm emphasizing this sense of motion because the Yoruba have a couple of important sayings or proverbs that tell you something about the importance of motion, the sense of motion or movement. They say, "Ai duro, ijoni. Ai duro, ijoni." We all Yoruba speakers, right? So I don't have to translate, but I will. Yoruba are saying, not standing still is dancing. And then they have another phrase that I like too, because it talks about the agency of motion, of movement. And it's something that I have used in different contexts. The Yoruba say, "Stretch out your leg and let dance catch it." You know, it's kind of like motion itself creates life, it creates action, it creates presence. So Efe Gelede is multisensorial in so many different ways. And I'll just mention one other thing that actually came up in my student's seminar presentation just before this talk, because he was talking about the art of food and foodways. And he mentioned akara or akaraje. These are bean cakes, deep fried bean cakes that the Yoruba are famous for. And he was talking about them in Brazil, where Yoruba people brought it when they came to Brazil. But that's what you also have to remember in a Efe Gelede festival context. It's about the tastes. It's about the smells of those bean cakes. It's about the smells within that marketplace, the sense of touch that one gets from the thick crowds that are in that space to come and listen to the songs and to see the dancers perform. Okay. Now, I'm going to depart from my usual procedure. I'm going to read the next 2 pages. Won't be long, but stick with me. And if you like, you can close your eyes and listen to my words, since we're talking about the power of words. But please, don't start to snore. Over the last 10 to 20 years, there has been a major shift in anthropology and visual and material culture studies away from texts to bodies and the senses. And I consider myself a part of that move. And I invented the term sensiotics to poke fun in a playful but serious way with those who are engaged in linguistically inspired semiotics. If we consider that these multisensorial insights are important, then I believe we have to think differently and work differently. Semiotics is a language-based approach, not a sensory one. Such a linguistic or logocentric approach to the arts has tended to distort or to blur understandings of the arts on their own terms, something that I've been trying to talk about since the 90s. When we consider the arts, they become forms webbed with words. Granted, we cannot avoid using words. Our discipline is basically words about images. But we need to go beyond this. As Mitchell has observed, quote, visual experience or visual literacy might not be fully explicable in the model of textuality. And Malcolm Gladwell, based on the work of Jonathan Schooner, notes that visual perception, is clouded or overshadowed by the verbal. That visual cognition is, but that visual cognition is immediate, holistic, and instinctive, whereas verbal cognition is linear and consciously constructed. It seems clear then that we need to explore how these arts communicate and evoke by means of their own unique sensorial modes. Thus, I'm proposing this inclusive and comprehensive project or approach that reveals the bodily, multisensorial basis of understanding of the arts, cultures, and histories, an approach that I term Sensiotics, that I have been feeling and thinking and working on, and that has been working on me since my first apprenticeships to Yoru sculptors in the 60s and 70s. I would contend that while language, for example, is one of the ways that we represent the world, before language, we began by perceiving, reasoning, theorizing, and understanding through all of our senses: sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste, and motion. Continually participate, though we may often be unconscious of them, in the ways that we literally make sense of the world and of arts. Seeing, hearing, tasting, etc. is thinking. Sensing is theorizing. Sensing is constitutive of thinking. And in the beginning, there was no word, only sensations. Now, there's a recent study that I just want to mention in light of that last sentence. Some neuroscientists wanted to see what was happening to the babies in the womb in relation to their mother's experiences. So they took a French mother who was about to give birth and a German mother who was about to give birth, and they recorded their voices in conversation, everyday conversation. And then those neuroscientists were there when the babies gave their first cries. And their cries imitated the tonal patterns of their mothers. They were already French babies and German babies even before they came out of the womb. So my suggestion here is that even before we come into this world, we are being shaped by sensory experience. And then when we become social beings and part of social structures, those social or cultural structures are shaping us in sensorial ways. That's my point. Now, my method that I'm going to suggest is for the work that I call body-mind work, or sensiotics, or what the anthropologist Paul Stoller calls evocatively sensuous scholarship. Here, one no longer aspires to achieve an impossible distanced objectivity of a so-called participant observer, which is typical and traditional in the discipline of anthropology. But I would maintain that that tradition has emphasized pretty much observation and not participation. And what I'm suggesting is that we should work as sensorially engaged participants, using all of our senses in order to open up the multiple sensory paths to knowledge and to understanding. My two apprenticeships with the Yoru sculptors were examples of this kind of approach. Granted, the differences between cultural insiders and outsiders will always remain. I'll never be a real Yoruba sculptor. Yet within these groups exist significant differences in cultural knowledge, in wisdom and understanding about one's cultural world, perspectives that give different kinds of insights. But I think perhaps if we think about it, most of us are not strictly insiders or outsiders, but rather cultural in-betweeners. And the engagement of the senses, our body-minds, is crucial to such transcultural engagement and understanding. Okay, no more reading. Now we play again. Okay. You can close your eyes because I'm going to give you another example of a Yoruba masquerade, but one that is strictly sound. It's known as Oro, O-R-O, Oro, and it's fearful. It's a night masquerade, and its presence is only through its sound. Oro is the enforcement branch of the society of elders known as Ogboni or Oshubo, which is the supreme court of any Yoruba community. It decides all of the social issues, all of the judgments about crime and punishment in a Yoruba community. And it's Oro that must carry out the judgments of those judges, okay? In simple cases, it might just be a whipping. In serious cases, it might be exile or capital punishment for the most serious of crimes. This happens at night, and every Yoruba who is not a member of the Oro society, and it's a very small, select group of individuals whose identities are not really known widely, will be abroad at night to carry out the judgments. So, close your eyes, because I'm going to leave the slide on. So, I want you to think about the dead of night, because this will happen on a moonless night. And the shutters on the windows are up, and everybody is inside except those who are out to do their job when they start to hear the voice of Oro. Okay, Oro night is over. I have to tell you of an experience that I had, because I didn't know that Oro was abroad the night I went to visit some friends in another town, and I went outside. They could have finished me, but they said, oh, there's that stupid white man. So we'll just let him go. They told me to get back into the house immediately, and things were okay. Because they had some serious business to attend to. Again, you know, we're talking about, it's the power of sound on a continent where orality is so important. Oral traditions and orality are very important. So maybe so much of these kinds of social institutions like this night masquerader is using the power of sound and of orality, something that maybe we don't share as deeply as a Yoruba person might share. But still, it can have its force. And the Yoruba have a concept for this. They have this notion of iluti. Iluti is the ability to hear well and to remember, and then to enact or embody the lessons that one hears. Iluti is the ability to learn, to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom. When a Yoruba person says to you, I understand, they don't say, I see. They say, I hear. Mo gbọ́. I hear what you're saying. I understand the lesson that you're telling me. So, sound, hearing, very important. Now let's take a look at this image, and we come to another art form. This is a Yoruba woman who has some elaborate tattoo scarification patterns on her shoulders and her upper chest, and also on her arm, and she probably has some on her back as well. These are known as kolo, and I've written about them. But I've written about them as a visual art. because I think you can see how delicate and precise the patterns are. These are very shallow cuts made into the skin, and then lamp black or charcoal is rubbed into it to give it that dark color and to raise it. So it has a slightly raised texture to it. So, and in fact, from a Yoruba point of view, it's mainly about texture. It's about touch. It's about the sense of touch. Now, a man will perceive this with his eyes first from a distance, but as one man told me, when we see a Yoruba woman with beautiful color, the weather changes to another thing. And it's all about the sensual, the imagined sensory touch of this wonderful body art form among the Yoruba. And this is heightened in sculptures that Yoruba sculptors make. Here's a wonderful example of it. It's a female figure with an offering bowl in front of her, but her entire body is covered with the textured form of those kolo on her breasts and her chest and on her back that you see. Because Yoruba sculpture is meant to be handled. It's not meant to be under plexi in a museum with a sign that says, "Do not touch." In your Yoruba context, the message is, please touch, please handle, because actually it's the owners who are adding their own life force to the sculpture that is serving on an altar by doing that. All right, we come to another sense that's important. Okay, the vision, the seeing, certainly. What you're looking at is another masquerade type known as egungun. Egungun celebrates the spirits of departed ancestors. And this masquerader, and specifically, is honoring warrior ancestors from a particular family. And so he embodies in his performance warriorhood, the courage of a warrior, and also the unpredictability of warfare. So he comes out, you notice his woolly hair. It's unkempt. That's unkempt. That's a clear sign for a Yoruba person. This guy is a little wild. He's not civilized. He's dangerous just by that fact. And you can't see it in this slide, but he has a Janus face. He has a face on the back as well as in the front. This is a warrior who can see behind him as well as in front of him. And he wears this tunic, this heavy blackened tunic that has embedded in it clubs and amulets and shells that are his warrior's armor. And notice his feet. He's got combat boots on. This guy he's trouble. And when he comes out in the festival that's honoring ancestors from different families, everybody knows he's coming before they actually see him. You know why? Because he stinks. It's the stench of his costume, of that tunic that he's wearing. Because that darkened color is the dried blood from many offerings, animal offerings and food offerings that have been layered onto this costume. He smells of death. He smells of destruction. And that's what makes people scatter. They run. And then when he comes into the performance space, people are still running because he is flanked by his attendants that you see here are a bunch of ruffians. They're tough guys. They're warriors in training. And they go around with him whipping people and frightening people and chasing people and so on. In fact, what they're doing is they're creating the ambiance of warfare as a way to honor those warriors of the past. So smell is the key scent and sense that brings the power of this particular masquerader. Here's another example of an egungun masquerade that honors collective ancestors. Now it's about beauty, and it's about being with it. The family creates these wonderful cloth ensembles. We're buying fabric in the markets that are coming from all over the globe as a way to show their devotion and love for those departed ancestors. And these perform, they have these large lappets of cloth, and cloth is the way that, descendants honor their ancestors. And you're going to see this performance now. I'm going to show a short clip of one of these egungun in performance. And these lappets fly outward on the air, as you'll see. It's made to fly outward. And as the Yoruba say, when the spirit of our ancestors dances in that way, it creates a breeze. And that breeze is a breeze of blessing. It's a prayer. So again, it's the sense of touch, not just the sense of sight of dance and of the music. That performance is a way in which the power of the arts are felt by people around them. It's a breeze of blessing in the shape of those egungun masquerades. And the Yoruba believe that art or ona, as I translate it as evocative form, has an affective presence. It has an aura to it. And certain individuals, when they don certain kinds of artistic forms, are said to have increased and potentially dangerous aura or presence, a kind of presence that we call ashe, or life force, or vital force. The power to have things happen and get things done. So you're looking at two photographs of Yoruba rulers, because it's those people who are in powerful positions within Yoruba society. That is, kings and queens, diviners, priests and priestesses, initiates to the gods, and egungun masqueraders honoring the spirit of ancestors. But here you're looking at two crowned rulers with their most special beaded crowns that have veils in front of their faces, because they embody a spirit and a power that is dangerous, and you can't look at the eyes of a ruler directly and openly. And so these veils shield them from you and you from them. It's another example of the power of evocative form. Now, as I've told you, I would argue that Yoruba artists, whether working in any of the media, song, sculpture, painting, tattooing, dance, whatever, cooking, and the audiences, both artists and audiences, are using all of their senses to both create and to respond to the affective, somatic, and aesthetic qualities of art, or ona, evocative form. In my own work among Yoruba people, at present I'm considering 7 senses. The usual 5 that we know about, but 2 others that are distinctive and equally important. Motion, and with its sensory organ in the inner ear, and extrasensory or suprasensory perception. Motion has to do with our relation to the gravitational force that we live in all our lives and our sense of balance. It's interesting to note that among the Elvehjem, neighbors and cultural brothers and sisters to the Yoruba, they have a concept of what is called agbadadodo, which refers to the moment when a young child first learns to rise up on his or her 2 feet and not fall down. That is the moment when that child is regarded as human and a part of the community. And the Yoruba have a similar concept that they call dogba, or balance. Balancing and artful motion are important concerns for the Yoruba, as expressed in the sentence that I gave you earlier, not standing still is dancing. And I extend that notion of balance and spatial orientation to cover all motions in a person's life and the inner ear as the sensing organ. Now I'm going to tell you a story when I realized how important motion was to, and the evaluation of a person's movement and ability to dance was for the Yoruba. I was new in the town, and I had this friend, Rufus Orishayami, and he said, hey, we're having a party, come and join us. I said, sure, why not? And you know, there's always dancing at a Yoruba party, and in most parties there is some dancing. Well, dancing is always in a Yoruba context. And the music started, maybe something similar to Victor Waifo, which is a high life tune. And I got out there and I started doing my Brooklyn Boogaloo, you know. And Rufus taps me on the shoulder and he says, Ishola, because that was my Yoruba name. He said, Ishola, let me tell you the first principle of Yoruba dance. I said, okay, Rufus, go ahead, tell me, what is it? He said, do not disturb yourself too much. Now, there was an important lesson, which I only realized after the fact. But people, Yoruba people, are looking very closely at how you move through this world and how you dance. And your dancing motion and style has to be suitable. It has to be appropriate to your age and your status within the community. And I was dancing like, I don't know, some teenage guy, and I was no longer a teenager, and it was inappropriate. And then I started learning more about it. And in fact, this whole notion about balance and movement is deeply embedded in Yoruba philosophical thought. That is, what you show to the world and in your appropriateness in matching a situation is an indication of your wisdom or understanding. The Yoruba have this other wonderful saying. They say, the stranger or the outsider usually sees through the nose. All right, now that sentence, sees through the nose, has two important things. First is that, you know, you're mixing, when you come into a new cultural situation, I'm sure almost all of you have had that experience. You're dropped into a place that you've come to for the first time. Everything is unusual. Nothing makes sense. That's seeing through your nose. But as you start to enter into a culture and start to learn its cultural sensorial ways, then things start to make sense. And you see with your eyes. You hear with your ears. You smell with your nose. You don't see through your nose. Those were important messages for me. And now I'm turning to the seventh sense. ESP, extrasensory perception, or suprasensory perception. Because I think that is something that we all share at one point or another, whether we recognize it or not. I mean, I think about, you know, Christian churches in this country, when people start to speak in tongues, they've gone into altered states of consciousness. They've gone somewhere else. And I think it's a reordering of our sensory experiences, maybe with the impact of synesthesia, that takes us to a different place. Well, altered states of consciousness, or trance, or possession, is a crucial part of religious practice in Africa, as it is in many other parts of the world. And so it's a sense that we have to make sense of and recognize as being present. And that's why I'm calling it suprasensory, not extrasensory, but suprasensory perception. So in these two images, you're looking at two priestesses who are in altered states of consciousness. They haven't been taking drugs, but they have learned how to embody divinity through elaborate initiations that include learning songs, learning dances, learning to cook, learning other kinds of basic knowledge. And that knowledge is what elevates them to be able to safely receive divinity in trance. So on the left is a devotee of Mamiwata. There she is at the ocean's edge with a paddle in her hands, trying to get to Mami out there in the ocean. And at a key point, she'll be held back by the others. Otherwise, she would go under and maybe not come back. And on the right is another Yoruba woman who is a devotee of Shango. She's dancing with a Shango dance wand that has this double-bladed form. She too is in a state of ecstasy. She's in an altered state of consciousness. And for the Yoruba, this is an important thing because the whole cosmos and pantheon of divinities, like trance or altered state of consciousness, is about the possibility of things that are beyond what we think of as reality. And the pantheon of Yoruba gods and goddesses is uncountable. The Yoruba have the formula that say, well, there are 401 Odisha, plus one, plus one, plus one. Because we all have the possibility of becoming Odisha when we leave this world for the next. So how many are there? No one knows. It's the notion of indeterminacy. And Wole Soyinka, the Nobel laureate, reminds us that in Yoruba divination system of Ifa, emphasizes for us the perpetual elasticity of knowledge, because the numbers of verses that a divination priest must recite is endless, infinite. And I just want to remind us that recent neuroscience confirms the elasticity of our brains. That is, we are constantly in the state of creating brain cells, and that our ability to learn continually changes. All right, with my final examples, I'm running a little late. How much time do you want to give me?
Well, it's been a little over now.
Okay. Are you still with me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give a few more examples and then conclude. And this takes us to the world of Ifa divination. And you're looking at Kolowole, a diviner that I work with for more than 2 years. And he's in front of a divination tray. And that divination tray is where the forces in the cosmos, Yoruba cosmos, are going to reveal themselves. You can see he's drawn 2 lines, intersecting lines. This is the crossroads. This is the meeting point of this world and its worldly forces and otherworldly forces, gods, spirits, and ancestors who are affecting the lives of us in the world. So people and communities will come to a diviner like Kolowole to try to figure out what forces are affecting them. He's not a fortune teller. He doesn't tell the future. But what he does do is he reveals those cosmic forces. Now, he has in his right hand a tapper, and you see an example of a tapper there on the left. And I've brought my own divination tray and tapper here as well. Now, as an art historian, I and others have waxed eloquent about the imagery that decorates these divination trays. And here's probably the earliest example collected and goes to a German collection in the 17th century from Ouida or Alada on the west coast of Africa. And this would have been used by a Yoruba diviner. Notice in the center of the circle, there are lots of dents. Those are the dents that were created by the tip of the tapper, of the divination tapper. So while we spend lots of time, and I have spent lots of time interpreting and understanding the imagery around the tray, what we don't talk about, and I only realized later on, is that this tray is a drum. It's a sounding form. And it's the sound that it makes that's as important as the imagery that you see on this wonderfully carved tray. Here's another example of a divination tray on the front side, and there it is on the back. It has this indented, carved out area. Every divination tray must have it because it creates a sounding chamber. And that's what you hear. That's how the diviner starts the session. Then he starts to give the invocation of all of the spirits that he wants to come to the session, to listen to him as he reveals the forces at work. And as he explained to me, it's that reverberation that brings the other world to this world during my session. So the tray is a drum. Now finally, I'm going to turn to color, because the Yoruba have a very clear chromatic system. They divide colors into 3 categories: pupa, funfun, and dudu. Pupa colors are hot colors. They're the warm colors, the hot colors. Funfun are the cool colors, and the dudu colors are the mediating colors in between. I want us to remember that color is not just about sight. We don't perceive and understand color just simply by sight, but that color also involves the sense of motion and the sense of touch. How is that? Sense of motion. Some colors, we say, advance toward us. What are the colors that advance toward us? The warm colors. And the cool colors seem to recede because they hit the retina of our eye in a different way. So color is about motion, not just about sight. And it's also about touch, because we talk about hot colors, reds, oranges, bright yellows, and we talk about cool colors, the blues and the greens, because we associate them with our environment and with temperature. Well, the Yoruba use these qualities of color in the way they honor their divinities and their individuals, because those divinities have certain kinds of personalities and attributes. They act in certain ways, so you want to approach them with the colors that are associated with them. So funfun, white, is seen as the coolest of colors for the Yoruba. And these 2 objects that you see, a beaded crown on one side and a cloth altar on the right, are for Obatala. Obatala is an aged divinity, slow in motion, embodying wisdom, composure, coolness of mind and spirit. That's what Obatala is about. So when you honor Obatala in your crown and your altar, you use white, cool white. On the other hand, if you're a devotee of Shango, god of thunder, volatile warrior, fickle, dangerous, but also interested in justice, you use his color, which is primarily red, but balanced with some white. And so you see a priest of Shango on the left, and you see an altar to Shango on the right from Brazil. Dominating colors. Those are colors that have force. They have presence. You don't use the wrong color with the wrong divinity unless you want trouble. So color is a powerful element. Now what about those mediating colors, those dudu colors in the middle? Well, most Yoruba will say that a pale yellow and a light green are mediating colors. They're the darker colors. They're the ones that sit between the hot colors and the cool colors. And those are the beads that are worn by Chifa Janaku, who is the chief Ifa priest in the city of Lagos. He is a mediator. He sits between the other world of the divinities and the world that we live in. He has to mediate those cosmic forces. And so the beads that he wears are mediating beads. They're known as otutu okon, beads of mediation and communication. And now let me conclude. Labi is a dear friend and a colleague of mine wonderful Yoruba scholar, philosopher, and linguist. He writes about how the Yoruba understand their artists as are. Are translates as itinerant individuals, strangers everywhere, at home nowhere, constantly on the move, and engaged in constant departures of creativity. That's what Yorubas expect of their artists. If we're to understand the creativity of artists and the responses of audiences, then we must understand how the senses shape and guide us on our journeys from the womb to the tomb. And for the Yoruba, that infinite cycle of coming from the other world, coming into the world, returning to the other world, and having the possibility of reincarnation. And that image of the eternal life cycle is embodied in this interlaced pattern, beaded pattern from the Yoruba. So I leave you with this. Let our body, minds, and our words soar as we engage all of our senses to understand the sensuous, evocative experiences that Yoruba people called ona, that Africans call by many different names across the continent, and we call art. Thank you. Sure.
We have time for questions. I'll let Henry pick.
Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Because you say different cultures have different inventories of senses.
Yes, Jan.
Is there such a thing as a transcultural definition of what senses are?
That's a good question. I don't know if there is. I think every culture knows.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. Jana's asked the question, do I think there is a transcultural definition of the senses?
Yeah.
Anybody want to take a stab at it? Because I don't know the answer. I think every culture recognizes sensory experience.
How would you define sensiotics if there isn't such a definition?
Well, I can define sensiotics as the study of the senses, which will vary from culture to culture. And I think the specifics of each culture is crucial to an engagement with sensiotics in that particular context. So I think it depends very specifically on the cultural milieu or context in which I would be working, since I've said that varies and people's understanding of it varies greatly. So I think I would have to say that it's complex and that it varies and that it would depend on where I was doing the study. And then I would be able to define it in that particular case.
How about if we defined it in terms of modes of knowing that begin in the body?
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, I think
See,
one of the
because-
interesting thing is that what neuroscience is producing is a cognition that we might associate with thought or consciousness is being understood also as a mode of knowledge that comes from the body. The whole kind of separation of mind and body is being redefined by neuroscience.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, because one of the things that's been a real challenge for me in developing this notion of sensiotics is that I get to read my artists and my humanists, but I also now have to read neuroscientists. And let me tell you, it's not easy. Maybe that's why I like senses rather than words so much, or a linguistic approach. But actually what's happening is that the view of how the brain works and how it processes sensory experience is under dramatic transformation in our understanding of that. And I'm making the claim that sensing is thinking and theorizing in and of itself, that it is constitutive of thinking. In the past, people have made that split between body and mind and said that, sensing and sensory experience is just, it's just something that then the brain takes into consideration and then begins to formulate and rationalize. I'm trying to suggest that before that rationalization and construction of those experiences, which we then communicate with each other in cultural context, is sourced in the sensory experience. That's the source of it. Yes?
That sort of leads to my question, which in each case, there was a physical organ,
Yeah?
even the two that were added with the inner ear.
Yes.
In the case of the supra, how are we defining it? The supra?
Suprasensory
Right.
perception.
Is there a corresponding?
There's where I think it has a relationship to synesthesia. Because I think it's probably the involvement of multiple senses simultaneously. I mean, the work on meditation is about suprasensory perception. Something happens to us physically, bodily, when we go into those altered states. We don't really know what's happening. That's why I've termed it and called it a concept of indeterminacy. It's something that's beyond. But I think it's something that is also very human, that we need to have something that is maybe just beyond our understanding, and that this supersensory perception, which I think is based in sensory experience, brings us to a different level of awareness or consciousness that maybe we don't understand, but that we experience.
So it's a multitude of factors.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I would think. Yeah.
Not defined as consciousness necessarily. Or,
Well, some people might.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, you have worked with Buddhist priests and done lots of meditation work, right? What's your understanding? What's your thinking about it?
Well, I don't know if I would consider it I don't know. I don't know if I'd consider it a sense in the same way that you're considering hearing and sight and so forth.
Yeah, maybe our categorizations are the problem.
I think the issue is that if for people who have an extra, what we call an extrasensory experience, the body changes. And that's why I come back to the issue of the body.
Yeah.
So if hearing, we can say there's an ear connected to channels inside that go into the brain. A trance, you don't have an ear, you don't have one organ. But something happens to the body, and I think that what Henry is talking about is knowledge through the body. Mm-hmm. And the body can be different parts of the body. I think you had some questions over
Yes.
there.
Well, so, I've always had the idea of rational thinking as being the thing that guides us principally has always seemed to be denying this sensation of the body that we have. We react with our emotions, and we feel this emotion in our skin. So I'm wondering if this is part of, like, the skin is the organ through which these emotions are also being experienced.
Well, yeah, certainly it is. Yeah. I think the skin is definitely one of the passageways for it, yeah, I mean, certainly for the sense of touch, but for everything. I mean, and the skin, as the envelope, body envelope, is the biggest sensing organ that we possess.
We blush. There's
Yeah.
physiological changes in our skin that are provoked by our experience and our thinking.
Yeah. Yes.
Isn't it true that they live in a culture that is extremely quiet because you don't get all of the civilization noises that you hear, so their senses are much more heightened than others, than other cultures, and that must have some effect on them. Because when you think of people going to meditate by themselves, I mean, they're away from the world, and I just wonder when they come. I don't know how closely they come to the closeness to other cultures or not, or probably not as much as.
Now, are you speaking about Yoruba culture? Well, the question was that they exist in a more quiet culture. Not to my experience. Yorubas, I didn't mention this, but the Yoruba people, who number probably about 35 million people today, are historically urban dwellers. Yoruba men and women love to live in close proximity to other Yoruba men and women. They don't like to scatter themselves in small villages or hamlets. And those urban contexts are not quiet. They're very noisy. And in fact, I mean, that sound environment is an important factor in understanding the sensory experiences in the people who live in that context. Because a Yoruba man or a woman who wanted to meditate would never really find a quiet place to do so. So they have to learn how to meditate or move to another state of being or consciousness in a situation of lots of noise, lots of action, lots of things going on. It takes a different kind of talent to be able to do it. And that reinforces my very suggestion about how the cultural sensorium varies from culture to culture and for various people within that culture. And that's really kind of my challenge. How do I make generalizations when those experiences vary greatly from a Yoruba youth, a Yoruba boy, different from a Yoruba girl, a married woman, an aged woman, an elder? Their position in society and their life experiences varies different, and their sensory experience is different as well. Yes, Koya.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the relationship between the senses and the sociocultural structures that you were talking about before. Like, because if it's the case that our senses originate in the body, but what we consider senses are shaped by like cultural knowledge, then how do those things act on each other, and how do those things relate?
Yeah, well, that's kind of my point, that enculturation begins with sensing the vibrations of our mother's voices when we're in the womb. Enculturation is already happening. So that when that child first cries, they cry with the tone patterns of their mothers. And then when we're enculturated as members of a society, those sensory experiences multiply. Certain societies, you learn to use your right hand to give gifts and to receive gifts. And you never use the left because it means something else. You know, those are the kinds of things that we take for granted. They become naturalized because we're in it. We're in the middle of it. So we're not actually realizing how we're being shaped and formed sensorially. You know, and then the lessons in words follow that reinforce those sensory experiences, not that they're happening separately. So that's essentially what I'm saying, that cultures and a cultural sensorium is one of the key defining factors of cultural identity. Does that make sense, Koya? Yeah. Yes?
But if that's true, what can you do besides merely observe and report?
Well, you can become a sensorially engaged participant. Do an apprenticeship with a sculptor, or a dancer, or a singer.
Do that in one particular circumstance.
Yeah, right.
Or any circumstance.
Yeah, in any circumstance. Yeah, well, that's why my book will focus and examples from my lived experience among Yoruba people, which goes, about 8 years of my life. It's not going to give the answers, but it's going to propose some suggested ways of thinking about it, and then it'll be for somebody else to work somewhere else. Good question, thank you. Yes?
Where
Yeah.
does supersensory, where does witchcraft figure into the supersensory in Yoruba?
Well, the question is, where does suprasensory fit into the concept of witchcraft among the Yoruba? Well, first of all, I have a bone to pick with that term, witchcraft. So I'll start there. There are no witches in Yoruba country, but there are powerful women and men who have abilities that other people may not have, that they can use for good or for evil. And part of it, they may possess some elements of suprasensory perception and abilities. But generally speaking, they don't go into trance. It's the devotees, the initiates of the gods and the goddesses who will go into trance, because they have been prepared through their initiations to receive that spirit and embody that spirit, and then speak with the voice of the divinity. And that's the context in which I'm giving an example for suprasensory ability. Does that answer your question? Sort of. Okay. Ned? Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah, I like this talk a lot, very stimulating. And I think you're onto something about when you were talking about you were corrected for dancing in an appropriate way. In terms of a kind of developmental, sensiotic thing over a lifetime, that you're supposed to have certain kinds of sensory experiences in certain registers of certain intensities, etc., at different age levels throughout life.
Yeah.
And that might get us toward, I look around campus and I'm all bundled up and I see the students walking around in short pants and short sleeves and things. And so it's just constituting persons in terms of sensory experiences that are age appropriate through the lifetime. They can listen to music louder than I can listen to, all of that kind of stuff.
No, Larry, you're right. You're completely right about that. And yes, and that's all about age.
Yeah.
And
Gender,
experience.
Class,
Right, yes.
All of that stuff figures into how do we're sensorially constituted as social persons.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what you're claiming.
Yeah, and I wonder how many UW students are actually freezing to death or freezing when they're out there with their flip-flops, but because everybody else in their group is doing it, they do it too.
No, they're learning to experience that in a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
As a part of their power and their strength.
Good example. That's an excellent example. Yes.
I have a question about the concept of sensiotics vis-a-vis semiotics. So sensiotics, synesthesia, and sensorial experience, and I could be just imposing a Western antiquarian paradigm. So you'll excuse me. In listening to you, I can see that movement is very key to this participatory experience, and I'm wondering if it is in any way appropriate to ask you if this sensiotics enacts a collapse of traditional subject-object relationship. Who's the viewer? Who's being acted upon? Who's viewing? Who's participating? Who's being acted upon? So I've heard these dynamics in your talk, and
Yes.
I'm just answering a question
Right
now about the participant being acted upon, and so I'm wondering how the classic subject-object.
Well, I guess I'm a
Problem.
post-classicist because I
So
don't
is it a
I don't think there's
collapse-
yeah I
collapse
don't
of this category.
yeah I think so and it goes back to the point that I was making in this shift from a traditional participant observer, which is mainly observation, where there is this separation of subject and object. Subjectivity and objectivity. It's the issue, I have an issue with objectivity. I think it's overrated.
No, of course.
I think it's a myth.
Right. Who is actor and who is acted upon?
Yeah, yeah.
Subject and object in that sense.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think I am collapsing that because I'm raising that issue. Because one of the things I learned early on is that I am part of the stories that I tell. There's no way I can be outside that. So I have to recognize it and be honest about it and deal with critiques of objectivity. Is he objective? You know. But I think if I consider all of the information that's available to me honestly and forthrightly, that's where I'm going to take my stand.
I've seen a lot of hands still up, and I wonder, let's try to bundle questions a little bit, because I'm sure it's great for Henry to hear what your questions are. So over in the corner there, I saw one over here. Tom, didn't you have your hand up? At least, okay, we've got about 4, so why don't we just start over there on the left and get your question out or your comment.
Well, I guess it's a comment of just that what I love about this is more the implications of it. Implications, and I don't know if hearing you talk about it more than, of just like how people learn, how people, scholarship, you know, and how that's defined without moving and being very still so often in certain ways. And just how we experience things and how what we think of as smart and what we think, you know, and the implications in terms of how we experience the world and our awareness of it and how we're aware of our body and our environment. You know, so it's the implications almost of it that I think is most delicious.
There's a taste word.
That's a tasty statement. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking very much in the same terms. I'm a massage therapist, and
Yes.
I think often we live in I think often people are sensory deprived, and I mean, I certainly feel like that in the winter often, and need to get away. And I was just in Mexico recently, and there were a lot of festivals leading up to Easter, and it was so colorful, and there were herbs, and you would walk through fennel, and the smell of the fennel would be released, and then coming back home in the winter and just thinking, oh, I got to bring some color into my life.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in where it goes, because I'm wondering, in today, with all our technology and people sitting in front of a screen all the time, how it alters.
Yeah, that's why you have to get up and dance mambo yo-yo periodically. But to respond to the comments.
Well, let's get all the
okay.
questions
all
out
right.
on the floor,
Okay.
I think. Okay, Tom, and there was one in the back there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we had a question about can you really say anything about the senses, because they're all, you know, culturally determined. But I, of course, we've talked before, and I see so many parallels, I think, with early modern cultures and you know, Western European Middle Ages. Is some of your observations about movement and people observing movement? They're saying the same things back in the 12th century. I mean, Stephen Jager wrote this wonderful book called The Envy of Angels, and it was all about observing people's gestures and the way they move and how that relates to their inner core.
Yeah.
Body and soul connected. I think we lost a lot of that. I don't know whether the dividing point is with Enlightenment, but I would say pre-modern cultures are much more attuned to the senses, and therefore there is an affinity, even going back to sort of Christian worship and ritual, which is very much about engaging multiple senses and understanding even that sense, that synesthesia, and even our terminology, the connection of the words, the common sense in the brain. I mean, the medieval theories of the way the mind works, very much based on that idea. You make sense of the world, understand through the common sense, through retrieving all of that information through the senses. So I think there's so much, actually there's a lot more common ground than we tend to think there is. And that's why your terminology, I think, is helpful. And even movement, I mean, all of that you could find in a medieval setting. I'm finding it in my research. Martin is writing about this new sensual
Right now.
philology right now as we speak.
During a Q&A.
Yeah. Well,
Another
yeah.
comment in the back.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Okay, so like a theoretical framework that is interested in knowledge derived from sensorial experience seems to privilege a body that works in a very specific way. So what happens within sensiotics with a body that can't move, can't see, can't hear, etc.?
Wonderful question.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other final comments or questions to get out on the floor, and then we'll let Henry have the last word? Anybody want to say anything more?
I just have one. What about technology and the computer entering our society today?
The question is, what about technology and the computer, if you couldn't hear? Okay, Henry, you have the last word.
Okay. I'm not digital, I'm real. That's my comment about computer and the technology. I think no. To come back to Mary's point, I think one of the things is that educators know that we possess multiple intelligences. People learn in different ways. Brenda knows this from her work at the Madison Children's Museum. Kids have certain abilities and tendencies and preferences that they use to make their way through the world. So multiple intelligences is, I think, a recognition of the importance of sensory experience. So I think there's lots of conversation that needs to take place between educators and others who are working in sensory studies. I think Tom and I have talked about this a lot, and today in my talk, one of the things that was coming more clear to me was the importance of orality, and perhaps as an understanding of why sounds are so important in the examples that I gave, where in the medieval world, when fewer people were literate who didn't read, it was the word that was more important to understand and to remember and to pass on. Just as iluti is the central concept for learning for the Yoruba, because of orality, the importance of oral traditions. So I think that we need to recognize the ability of our bodies. And the final question, an excellent question, is that when we have studies of people who are sensory deprived in some sense, either sight or hearing or in taste or touch, whatever it might be, we have many examples where their bodies are compensating in specific ways for those absences. And to me, those examples are another reinforcement of the idea of the importance of sensory experience and knowing and understanding those sensory experiences as the source of knowledge, wisdom, and our cultural selves.
I would remind you that a 50-minute video on this concept of embodied knowledge with many people from, different fields is available on the Institute website. So if you're intrigued by Henry's approach here, there's more feasting to do. So let's thank Henry for...
Thank you.